Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today we're tackling something, well, honestly, it's one of the most famous, bizarre, and let's face it, totally misunderstood stories ever written. Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. You know the basic setup, right? A guy wakes up as a giant bug. But today, we're going to look way past the carapace and the antennae to uncover the absolutely crushing modern realities hidden underneath. Just a giant bug? All right, let's dive right into this, because when most people pick this up for the first time, they hit a massive wall of frustration, and it's totally natural to feel a bit baffled by the sheer absurdity of the premise. There's this great quote from a Reddit thread where a reader basically threw their hands up and asked, Gregor turned into a bug. How else was his family supposed to react exactly? His family wanting to be rid of him was a perfectly rational response. And you know what? Fair point. If your household's main provider suddenly woke up as a literal rotten food-eating insect that terrifies the neighbors, panicking is frankly the only rational response. But if we just read it literally, we're completely trapping ourselves.
We really have to stop staring at the bug itself and start looking at what that bug represents. If we shift gears from the literal reading, a guy turning into a gross insect, and move to an allegorical reading, the whole thing suddenly snaps into focus. What we're actually looking at is a breadwinner suffering a sudden, completely debilitating breakdown.
Let's frame it like this. And this actually comes from that same forum discussion. What if, instead of a bug, Gregor woke up with a massive stroke, or severe paralyzing depression? Or what if he woke up as a severe alcoholic? When you swap that in, suddenly Kafka's bizarre absurdism translates perfectly into harsh modern realism. The events of the story don't actually change, but our perspective completely flips.
Moving on to part 2, the ultimate workplace injury. Let's look at how this builds through a professional lens, because even though this was written way back in 1915, it captures that modern sinking dread we all know as the Sunday scaries, or honestly, just total workplace burnout. Think about it. When Gregor wakes up with all these legs and a hard shell, his first thought isn't panic about his body. No, his very first thought is panic about being late for work. He is exhibiting classic burnout. He's constantly complaining about his grueling train commutes, the terrible food, these fleeting, superficial relationships, and having a highly toxic boss. Actually, the German word Kafka uses here is Ungeziefer, which translates to an unwanted pest. It perfectly captures Gregor's utter exhaustion with being a traveling salesman. Now, here's a super fascinating piece of real-world context. Franz Kafka's actual day job was as a claims adjuster for the Workers' Accident Insurance Institute. Literally, he spent his days evaluating debilitating industrial accidents. So when you look through that lens, Gregor's Metamorphosis reads exactly like the ultimate, totally uninsurable workplace injury. And it gets worse. When the chief clerk actually comes to his house to check on him, Gregor is pleading for his job through a locked bedroom door. His words are just heartbreaking. He says, I'm willing to work. Traveling is a hard life, but I couldn't live without it. Don't make things any worse for me than they are. Stand up for me and the firm. It's this incredible mix of dark comedy and pure tragedy. You literally have a grotesque giant bug begging his middle manager for job security. Which brings us to a really crucial definition. We hear the word Kafkaesque thrown around all the time to describe like an annoying trip to the DMV. But academic analyses of the text show that true Kafkaesque horror is much deeper. It's the profound dread of an entirely indifferent system treating human beings as easily replaceable machines. It's that numbing familiarity of everyday life that just quietly, slowly strips away our humanity. All right, part 3, the trap of debt. Because this systemic indifference, it doesn't just clock out at 5 p.m. It bleeds straight into the home. Let's shift to the familial lens and explore how economic pressures completely warp our closest relationships. Before the transformation, Gregor's entire life is defined by one thing: obligation. He's working this soul-crushing job for one reason, and that's to pay off a massive debt his father owes to his boss, who they just call Mr. Chief. This right here is the root conflict of the entire story: debt bondage. Gregor's whole identity has been flattened into one single, incredibly fragile role: the economic provider. So what happens when he can't provide anymore? Well, look at how the Samsa family's empathy just shifts. Before the transformation, they are 100% financially dependent on him. Then, day 1 of the bug incident, absolute horror and confusion. Fast forward a few months, the family has been forced to take on menial jobs to survive, and that horror turns into growing resentment at the burden Gregor has become. And finally, the conclusion? Profound relief at his death.
It's shocking, but it shows how rapidly familial love can erode when it's made entirely conditional on someone's economic output.
Which forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. Is his family inherently cruel, or are they just desperately trying to survive? Scholars point to a Marxist interpretation of alienation here. The idea is that once Gregor stops being economically productive, his family is forced into grueling labor themselves. The economic system alienates them from each other. It literally pits their basic bare-bones survival directly against their love for their son and brother.
Part 4. The grotesque modern body. Let's pivot to the existential lens for a minute and explore how our bodies and minds physically react to the crushing weight of modern life. If we ground this in academic theory, like an analysis from the Rupkatha Journal, late 19th and early 20th century degenerationists were actually highly concerned about the human body. They predicted that the sheer speed, stress, and hysteria of modern industrial life would irrevocably deform us. They had a name for it: the entropic body. It's this concept where the frantic, high-stress pace of modernization actually throws biological evolution into reverse, reducing humans back to a state of desperate survival. So, under the scientific theories of Kafka's era, Gregor turning into a bug isn't just some random magical curse. It is the logical, physical conclusion for a man who was already being worked like a subhuman pack mule. These academic theories basically link exploitative modern labor directly to the betrayal of the physical body. Gregor's identity was so incredibly fragile because it was built entirely around how useful he was to everyone else. When his mind just couldn't take the burnout for one more second, his body literally devolved into this grotesque form that matched exactly how alienated he felt inside. This brings us to part 5, the tragedy of being useless. Now we're going to pull all these analytical threads together and look at the deeply emotional, really gut-wrenching climax of Gregor's story. It all cuts right to the absolute core of our discussion today. How do we actually measure the value of a person? Are we subjects with our own agency and humanity, or are we just commodities, tools for economic survival? There's this heartbreaking scene where Gregor's mother and sister decide to remove all the furniture from his bedroom. Their reasoning is that it'll give him more room to crawl on the walls. But practically speaking, by doing this, they are effectively stripping away his human identity. Because he can no longer labor, he no longer deserves those basic human comforts. The sheer shame and stress of their financial ruin totally severs whatever human bonds they had left. And the ultimate betrayal comes from his sister, Greet. Keep in mind, she initially acted as his only caretaker, but eventually, she says, it must be gotten rid of. If it were Gregor, he would have long ago realized that a communal life among human beings is not possible with such an animal. Notice she calls him it. At that moment, he ceases to be her brother. He's just a pest that's hurting the family's ability to rent out rooms to boarders. The defining tragedy of the story is devastatingly clear. Gregor's tragedy isn't that he becomes an insect. It's that he was only considered human as long as he was useful. Kafka isn't just spinning a weird, surreal fantasy here. He is holding up a very harsh mirror to the conditional nature of love and worth in modern society. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on today. If you were stripped of your job, your productivity, and your economic value tomorrow, how much of your humanity would the world still recognize? Thanks so much for exploring this with me today, and keep questioning the systems around you.